YouTube channel's back up, but we're still going to send a notice to the public that if it does fail again, you can go to the Rogers channel and I believe also ottawa.ca. So, I should also mention Councillors Dudas and McKenney are in fact here. They had some computer problems, I believe, at the beginning of the meeting, so we have everyone here except Councillors Deans and Shirelli. So, Mr. Kanalakis, if you want to continue on your presentation, then we'll open it up to questions from members of council.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure where I was on. I was moving. I just finished Children's Services. I don't know if council heard that part or not.
I think the slide was up, but we didn't catch your words, so probably you could start that section again.
Okay, I'll just quickly recap Children's Services. That effective September 1st, early on, child and family centers and all licensed child care centers before and after school programs were permitted to operate at full capacity. The City of Ottawa was fortunate to receive $13.4 million in Safe Restart funding from the province to assist service providers. And this is money over and above what we received before. And this will support increasing municipal child care centers to full capacity. Our Children's Services continues to stabilize its staffing complement in order to enhance the health and safety measures, adhere to legislated ratios, and meet the updated guidelines from the province and Ottawa Public Health. And it's anticipated that our own municipal child care centers will return to full capacity in early September, and Donna Gray will be providing information communicating that very shortly. Other key actions on slide 7 I'd like to note, which I think speaks to the level of effort that was implemented. It was 7,000 wellness visits were conducted in Ottawa community housing buildings and priority neighborhoods. We've also initiated, and the memo just went out on this from Clara Friere, new neighborhood ambassador program pilot, which connects with youth in priority neighborhoods to focus on youth mental well-being, youth leadership, and youth employment. And this involves our own integrated neighborhood services team, the Boys and Girls Club, Ottawa Public Health, our Recreation Department, Emergency and Protective Services Department, and Ottawa Police Service neighborhood resource teams. And the priority neighborhoods for this program have been selected in their Vanier, Overbrook, and Herongate. We've also provided essential washroom and facilities to people experiencing homelessness. We facilitated the distribution of over 350,000 masks to community members in need. This number includes a total of 24,500 cloth masks distributed, including 10,500, and a big thanks to United Way, who provided the 10,500 masks with United Way Facing Forward. The Human Needs Task Team also engaged with over 80 different community agencies across the city to distribute these masks to clients in need. And a total of 328,000 disposable masks have been distributed, including 250,000 handed out at OC Transpo stations to riders, and the remaining were provided to 57 different community agencies. So I think that's an amazing effort. Funding has also been provided to community agencies supporting diverse groups during the pandemic through Ottawa's Social Service Relief Fund. And the first round of funding included distribution of $3 million to 73 agencies. And finally, the Human Needs team is continuing to assess community agency service resumption needs, and we're in very close contact with them. Now, on slide 8, I'd like to speak to our services for a minute. On August 4th, the city moved into phase 2 of our reopening plan. This included the reopening of museums, additional service of client service centers, our municipal election offices, fitness centers, pools, arenas, indoor rentals, financial needs testing program, enhanced in-branch library service at 20 locations, and more. We also implemented our before and after school programs, which were launched at 24 locations to meet the September return to school needs. 215 animation sessions for children were delivered as part of our Park Ambassadors tours at over 20 parks across the city. We also booked appointments and scheduling for Service Ottawa and recreation and cultural activities. 3,000 client service center appointments were booked, and 33,300 recreation, cultural, and facility services activities have been scheduled since August 6th. So our staff have been incredibly busy managing this. In terms of keeping our service delivery safe, all city facilities have been assessed and retrofitted in accordance to public health guidelines. the focus on the safety of our employees and residents or anyone who enters the building. Program and rental protocols have been updated to reflect the revised indoor attendance maximum of 50 people and the provincial amendment to specify 50 people per programming or rental space within a facility. And we also bought, this is something you might not know, 127 electrostatic disinfection spray units, which have been purchased and implemented to ensure the fast and efficient sanitization of facilities across the city. Current screening, cleaning, and disinfecting protocols are reviewed on a continuous basis. Our ongoing inventory of non-medical and medical personal protective equipment has been secured. Communication, resources, guidance, and information is provided to community partners on facility and programming reopening protocols. We're going to continue, slide 10, to closely align with Ottawa Public Health's latest guidance and provincial directives. Our focus remains on ensuring employees and residents remain safe in the delivery of city services. We're currently preparing for all scenarios, including a possible resurgence or a second wave of COVID-19. Our emergency operations group is working hard to ensure that we incorporate our best practices and lessons learned from the first 3-4 months that we've been in this to ensure that we're even more fluid and even more fine-tuned in the event there's an upsurge. And we must continue to remain flexible and adaptable to ensure service continuity and responsiveness to emergent community needs. So finally, our people, slide 11, protecting and preserving our workforce and optimizing our full complement of city staff has been our number one priority from the beginning. On August 11th, I issued a directive to all employees who can work from home to continue to do so until the end of 2020. This allows for increased physical distancing of city facilities, which contributes to the safety of staff on site and who have to be in the facilities to do their work. We've assessed our workforce and it continues in response to evolving service needs, including redeployment, ongoing evaluation of health and safety measures required to protect the workforce, and we're ongoing cooperation and collaboration with our collective bargaining agents on our shared goal of protecting and preserving our workforce. Finally, on slide 12, what can Council look forward to in the coming months? And we're going to have a very busy fall. In September, a FEDCO meeting, you're going to get an economic recovery update. This report from Mr. Willis, our General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure Economic Development, will focus on the city's economic recovery efforts to date, both through the Mayor's Economic Partners Task Force and the Emergency Operations Center Economic Recovery Task Team, and the work ahead given the current and projected economic climate with an increased focus on business support, job creation, and investment attraction. We're also preparing to respond to what we believe will be federal and or provincial infrastructure funding, which will be underway. We have to be ready for that, so we're reviewing all of our capital programs and our needs for the ones that are shovel-ready and be able to meet any of the guidelines they give us. Wendy Stephenson, our Treasurer, CFO, will be providing a financial update in October, the 2020 year-end forecast, and the Q2 financial status. You're also going to hear about the COVID-19 impacts and mitigation measures, including provincial Phase 2 funding resolution. And we're also going to be receiving the 2021 budget directions, timelines, and consultation process. And to keep things interesting, we've reviewed the 2019 to 2022 City Strategic Plan, which Council just approved a little while ago, and our term of council priorities. We've analyzed that and we'll be providing an update on what we believe is still doable from now to the end of term of council, and we'll be bringing that to council in October. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Tierney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I think I noticed Eli's hand went up literally seconds before me. So, Eli, did you want to go ahead first?
That's okay. Go ahead. It's okay. I'll wait.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Eli. I'll keep it brief. First of all, big thanks to Dr. Etches and your team, your social media team, the messaging. You guys are phenomenal. I think you're the strongest, if not in the province, across the entire country. So thank you for that. And also, I'm very happy, as you know, the East End elected officials definitely were pushing for the Ottawa Hospital to get a test facility, and it looks good news that they're going ahead with what Cameron Love promised is a test facility at the Ball Diamond and Councillor Luloff and MPP Blais have offered suggestions for the more permanent facility that they say will go even further east. So that's good news. Well, I have a couple of questions. First of all, it's our dashboard, and I brought this up a couple of times. And, when you say that there's a ward and the numbers are at a certain level and we're showing them in the 100,000, is this a requirement by the province how we do it? Because I look at Toronto, I look at Mississauga, and they do it by village or by zones. So it's actually much more finite. And they also provide the actual number as well as the 100,000 number. And I think we have a really good system with the Ottawa neighborhood study where they've defined these kind of villages. Is there anything we can do? Are we going to look at changing this so we can actually target more where the real areas of interest are? Because our wards are very broad. Some of them are long, and they're going to get longer in some situations. So can you comment on that?
Yes, I know our epidemiology team has thought about this very carefully. There's no provincial obligation to, report on cases in any geographical mapping-based way. But we know that people are interested in this kind of information. Our concern with going to a lower level geography is that we are different than Toronto in terms of the density of population. And so when you get to the more rural areas or the areas, suburban, lower density, it's maybe more possible to identify individuals. There's more concern around privacy, but I think it's fair enough to take a look again. We'll take this feedback and see what else can be done. Certainly, then the actual numbers as well as the rates, those are that's information we can share.
And I appreciate that a lot because I've done quite a bit of research amongst municipalities in Ontario, and they're actually using ArcGIS for the Peel region, which is the information program for tracking and geolocating, and we use that at the city for all of our stuff within the city. So I'm not sure if it's a resource issue or a cost issue, but I think, and I'm seeing lots of nodding heads, it'd be really beneficial, especially if you go have a look.
It's a privacy issue, and it's an issue. It's a privacy issue. And it's an issue of sending the wrong message that could be unhelpful. As the population density piece I've spoken to, but the other piece is that. This is not a problem for somebody else. This is a problem for each one of us that COVID's in our community. And if you take a look at a map where one area is dark and where you live is not as dark, that's not helpful because if people relax their behaviors, the hotspot will change. It really, this virus requires all of us to keep doing our part to physically distance. We can't say one area, it's fine to go about things as normal. We all have to shift. So that's a concern. And we are working in communities where we see any kind of clustering in time and space. So if we see something where there's more cases than we would expect randomly occurring, then that is where we're taking a community-level approach to go and talk with leaders in the community to translate information, to get it out through multiple channels, sometimes to bring testing closer if that's part of it. So there are strategies to try to look at places where we're seeing higher risk. So I think that we will take it back. We'll take another look to see what might be done in a helpful way. But sometimes this information doesn't really add to what we need to know and what we need to do.
So, and on that, you look at Mississauga's population 1 million something. It's very similar to us. I agree completely about the rural aspect because that would be way too targeted. But certainly I assume there has to be a solution to say, look, if you're in urban or if you're in a suburban setting, that's enough where you won't be exposing anybody, and maybe something on the rural band where it's more broad, where it doesn't go into such detail, where you keep the zones wider so it doesn't target individuals. But I look at Mississauga and the Peel region and how they have the zones. There's like 50 zones just for Mississauga, and they're clearly not concerned about the privacy issue. I think they're more concerned about identifying the areas of need, and that's something I'm having a real challenge understanding when my ward comes up as the third highest every time, and I'm asking, where are those areas of need? I'd like to know, even as a councillor, and I can't find that information out because we want to get the supports to them. So I really appreciate it. If you can go back and have a look, test out that map, you'll see they have the real number, the 100,000 number, And this is going to go on for years. So it'd be best to find out where those areas are, in my opinion. But I do want to thank you for the work you do.
So we are working on the ground where we see that more intervention may be required, and we do need everyone across the city to do their part. This is not something that just affects somebody else.
Great. Okay, I look forward to seeing what you guys uncover if you're able to provide that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Tierney. And Councillor El-Shantiri, I want to thank you for representing me at the Lebanese Embassy during that difficult time in Lebanon's history with the explosion that killed so many people. And I know Councillor Derouz and you are working hard at fundraising. I'm going to a fundraiser with the Lebanese community as well tonight, and we're going to keep it to the maximum that are allowed to be there because of physical distancing. But we have obviously a very large and vibrant Lebanese Canadian community, and many members of the community were affected as a result of the explosion in the capital of Beirut. So thank you, Councillor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your kind words. And if I can just say one thing, thank you to the Canadian Red Cross for stepping up. And obviously, my experience in my ward creates some relationship, and it was easy to work this time around. Being said, Dr. Atchis, first of all, thank you for all you do, you and your team and all your staff. One question we get quite a bit from our residents, especially now with the school going to be open. How would parents know the difference between, or even teacher, between what you want to call the seasonal flu and the coronavirus? And that question been pop up so many times. How would I know if my kid have the corona or have the just a normal flu season? As I think some parents would agree, come November, that's the high season of flu in school system anywhere. So how could we tell people to, should they do self-testing? Should they go line up?
So the good news is that the hand washing that we're doing now, the physical distancing and wearing masks will help limit influenza transmission. So we're hopeful we'll see less influenza compared to usual, and that is what's happening in our southern hemisphere. The flu season is more mild, less transmission. We can't rule it out based on symptoms, and so people who have symptoms of a respiratory illness need to have a COVID-19 test. It may well be that they'll do a flu test, but that is still to be determined. The COVID test is what's available in our assessment centers. The Ministry of Health is looking at whether they need to add in some flu diagnostics into the assessment centers, but we'll see. So the main thing is the basics. Again, if you're sick, stay home. Go get the COVID test, and I think that we'll be describing the patterns. We'll be talking about what we see, but we have to treat this differently. Where previously people may have thought, it's just a cold. We are asking people to make sure that they stay home now.
And with that, and I know there's quite a bit of information on Ontario Public Health or Ottawa Public Health. Are you going to make down it or make it easy for parents to know this is the sign of the COVID and this is the sign for a normal flu or cold? They need to identify it, self-identify?
So we have a nice website now that started. It's related to schools reopening with much directed at parents, and it includes a screening tool. So the screening tool is about whether your child, you could check it out right now on our website around schools. I had it open. It asks about, did your child have a fever? Do they have a cough? Do they have a runny nose? Are they short of breath? These symptoms, we're not going to say it's COVID or it's a cold or it's a flu. The answer, next step is, if you have these symptoms, stay home and seek COVID testing. So that is a specially created tool for COVID. The province may come out with something else to make sure that students are screened every day before they go to school. But until we have that provincial tool that's ready right now, on our website. We recommend parents have questions about what to do when their child's sick. That's something they can use.
And I apologize. I know we asked you this question many times before, actually from the beginning of the pandemic. Are we going to have a mobile testing for the remote area? And I understand it's Ottawa Hospital who's in charge of the testing, but it doesn't make it any easier for residents who live 60 or 70 kilometers from the nearest testing zone. In some remote area in the rural Ontario, they have dedicated to the paramedic to do those testing. Obviously, the paramedics are busy enough, they can do massive testing, but I'm sure in some special cases, we need the paramedic to step up and help out with those testing.
So right now, if there's somebody who needs to be tested for COVID-19 and they have mobility issues, they can't get out, there is a referral service through their healthcare provider to access testing, so they can have a mobile service if needed. That's provided through the Champlain LHIN. And I've seen the plans. I've seen the testing strategy that is being submitted to Ontario Health for funding. And it does include mobile service. So it's building on assessment centers. It will also use mobile sites. Somehow somebody just went off mute, I think. It'll use mobile sites like the drive-through approach, and there will be a mobile component. So that is what our partners are looking at, getting funding to be able to do.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ash. And Mr. Van, if I can ask Mr. Kanalakis a question, or do you want me to come back on for Mr. Kanalakis?
No, carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Kanalakis, thank you for your update. And one group of folks who's keeping us informed and answering all our questions is the Councillor Liaison and the Human Need group. I just want, on behalf of all of us, and I can tell you, feel free to speak on behalf of all of us, to say thank you for our staff who's keeping us informed, who's given any information we have asked, any update they know. They're stepping up to the plate. Just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for them. Continue that service and provide, because there's a lot of questions, a lot of theory out there, a lot of masks, whether it works, doesn't work. I don't want to go through detail, but I just want you to know every question we have submitted to our staff, we got a great answer and great service. I just want to send that up.
Thank you, Councillor. Really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Merci. Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to Dr. Etches. Yesterday we had a great retreat for Ottawa Public Health and saw the big picture of all the things that you do. It's way beyond COVID, and COVID, of course, is the priority. But it's good for people to know and be reminded of all the functions public health need to do and are doing, and under such incredible circumstances. And it's amazing work, and I hope the province recognizes that, since this is costing a lot of money. It's a lot of stress on the same people over and over again, and I really hope that they'll see that this is absolutely essential work, and I call Ottawa Public Health our essential workers, Uber's essential workers. So in terms of going back to school, it's something that not far from me in terms of having been a trustee for 8 years and watching all this concern. What a big job they have, and I appreciate the fact there's going to be nurses on the ground. One of my questions is in terms of busing. It's probably one of the most complicated parts because it's getting the kids to the school. And come to my attention, too, that we'll have students taking OC Transpo for the first time because we have grade 7 students who do not get yellow buses, and they will be put on OC Transpo buses. And that after being, in their homes for all this time, do we have some tips and advice we can give parents that are sending their kids to school that have no other choice, because that's another a big category. And of course, we're all nervous about the school situation, but this further complicates it.
Yes, I can take that back to the team in terms of making sure we have specific messaging related to transportation. I believe we do have information on our website for schools that indicates the kinds of things we'd be looking for to add protection on school buses, like wearing masks and distancing in the lineups, having assigned seats. This is something that the school boards are definitely working with the transportation authorities to finalize. They've got our advice about how to decrease the risk of transmission. We also know that walking and biking to school is useful for children's health. If that can be done in a safe, supervised way where needed. That also is being promoted by Ottawa Public Health, and we'll double check on that.
That's a good point, and that's something that's close to my heart is active transportation. And as a city, that's our job to make sure that they're safe routes, and something we have to continually work on to ensure that that's a possibility for students. Thank you very much. In terms of the testing sites, I appreciate that there's going to be another one at Coventry Road, and that's great. My concern is those who do not drive and those who cannot go to a drive-in. There's vulnerable people out there who can't drive, and I'm hoping that we'll concentrate on them. And from my understanding and statistics, that they're usually more vulnerable to COVID-19 because there's a lot of people that are seniors. There's others that are essential workers, and they have no choice but to continue working, and they take the bus. But but in terms of testing, they can't get to the test sites. They can't get out to the school on Moody Drive. They can't get out. They can't do a drive-through. So, is there plans to look at more mobile testing, particularly to vulnerable areas?
Yes, thank you. Just as Councillor El Shantiri was asking about mobile services too, so I've seen that is part of what our partners that are running the testing system are looking for funding to be able to do. What I will add, I didn't add in that answer, was that the community health centers that are part of the Ottawa Health team are also looking at ways to make testing more available across the city, maybe not in a mobile way, but through their resources that would be for populations who have less advantage, who do not have the ability to drive through a drive-through, for example, and who need access closer to home. So there are multiple ways that our partners are looking at trying to get more points of access for COVID-19 testing across the city, with attention to equity and the barriers that people face.
Thank you very much. And again, a reminder to everybody of all the important work that you do beyond what's happened with COVID-19 and how you're balancing it all. And I appreciate all the work. Thank you very much. My next question is for our city manager. You were talking about resources, and a big concern we have in Bay Ward is youth services. I'm looking to put together a task force for our area because it's been pretty tense this summer. We've had shootings. We've had a lot of youth who are in distress, and COVID-19 just complicates it even further. And we need help. And it's about working with partnerships. It's not just the city, but it's us reaching out to all our partners in the community, and they are willing partners. And I'd like to know what can the city offer for our community.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, Donna Gray had updated me on I got the conversation she had with you, Councillor, and she's on the call now too. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask her to comment and share with everyone what the plans are for our neighborhood teams going in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So we have met as a sponsor table of the Integrated Neighborhood Services teams, which includes Ottawa Public Health, Recreation, Culture and Facility Services, Ottawa Police Services as well, to take a look at what are the needs in that community. And the first start is to do the assessment of what's currently, the resources that currently exist in the community and what we have available, and to look at with that community itself, what are the gaps that exist in that community to date. And then we'll be looking at building a plan with councillors to look at how we prioritize some of the resources in that community, working with the community. Because we do know, as the councillor Kavanaugh has stated, that there are a lot of activity and groups engaged in that community right now. What we're looking at is there a better way to look at integrating, coordinating, and then filling the gaps should there be some that need to be filled.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's not just a quick fix. It's something that we have to think in terms of long term, in terms of employment opportunities, in terms of just moving youth in a different direction. And of course, this is challenging times with COVID-19, and I appreciate the participation of the city in working with the other community members. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Next, Councillor Brockington. Councillor, congratulations on your re-election as an AMO board member, representing us at the City of Ottawa at the provincial body. And also, as I mentioned in my remarks, we have another great event coming up in the future. It was just announced that the Canadian Pacific Ladies Professional Golf Association is going to come back to the Hunt Club in your ward in 2022, and they were last here for the 2017 celebrations, and it was their most successful Ladies Open in history. So we hope to even do better, and that's going to take place in River Ward. So, Councillor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your kind words about the result on AMO and my colleagues for your support. It's a really good organization, and I'm very happy, not just for me, but for the City of Ottawa that has a seat at the table in what has been and what will continue to be unprecedented times. So thank you. I just have a few questions today. Dr. Etches, thank you for what I think has been extraordinary work, in particular this summer, as what seems to be daily changes to what is being expected for our schools to open. OPH has been on the ball, and I do want to applaud you and your team as well. And as well for recognizing what parents are going through, that they are struggling whether or not to send their kids to school or keep them at home. And as we see, there's still a lot of concern out there. The one question I have for you is, once a vaccine for COVID has been developed, will OPH make it a mandatory requirement within a particular timeline for students to be immunized?
I think that the policy around COVID vaccine will be set federally and then provincially when it comes to requirements. So I could say it's quite possible it would be added to the list of mandatory school vaccinations. That's quite possible, but that would be a provincial decision.
Very well. Okay, thank you. To the city manager, I have had a number of recent conversations with General Manager Chenier about our community centers, their timelines for reopening, the types of programming or services that are going to be offered and when. I'm not sure if Mr. Chenier is present, but can we get a sort of a present day update on the reopening plans of our community centers and the programming rollout that we're going to be seeing in the next few weeks?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Dan is on the line. Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am here. Yes, we are planning the gradual reintroduction of services at community centers throughout the fall. Earlier in the fall, we'll be reintroducing drop-in access to things like fitness centers and activity rooms, gymnasiums, those kinds of things. As well, in mid-September, we will be releasing our e-guide that will detail the registered programs that will be available. With what we are looking at is an early to mid-October start on those programs. We've, as members of council have probably seen, we have already issued our aquatics guide for both the Learn to Swim program as well as advanced aquatic certification to become lifeguard and those kinds of things. So we're moving in that direction. We have just this week started registration for our before and after school programming. To date, looking at the first few days of registration, they have been very low. And so we would look at members of council if they are aware of need in their community. As of today, we certainly have a lot of capacity to be able to serve the public. And we are looking, because the school boards, the English Public School Board has changed their start dates from September 13th. We are looking at an adjustment in starting those programs as well. And certainly looking to spread the word that we have availability in terms of accommodating families with after-school programming. The other piece that we're looking at is that by September the 7th, arena users will have confirmed their seasonal bookings and their needs for the season. That is an ever-evolving piece of work as governing bodies are finalizing the format of play that they will allow. And then based on the amount of ice time that will be required, we'll be making decisions in terms of moving to open other arenas. We currently have 5 arenas open, which was sufficient to meet the very reduced summer need. We will do an evaluation of what other sites we need to open to accommodate what people are locking in terms of demand for ice time. In terms of arena participatory programming, things like public skating and those kinds of things, we are looking at later in September to start up those activities as well. I hope I've covered most of it, but if there are any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you. Older adults have sent in a number of inquiries about the restart for aqua fitness programming. Is that not included in the aqua registration that just started? Is that something that will happen later, or has registration already started for older adult aqua fitness?
No, it will be part of our fitness registration. That will be part of what I talked earlier. So what we have already done or launched is the Learn To. The fitness, both land and aquatic, will come a little bit later as part of our e-guide that will be released shortly.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chenier, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sudds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few questions. I'll try to keep it brief. First, for Mr. Kanellakis. With respect to the economic recovery and the financial impacts to the city, in the memo that went out from Wendy Stephenson the other day, there's reference to some of the timelines for receiving funding from the federal provincial restart agreement. And I'm wondering, I know the first phase, we're aware of those results and we'll be receiving that funding. Do we know when the second phase of funding decisions will happen?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the City of Ottawa has to submit an application for Phase 2 by October 30th, 2020, which is supposed to be supposed to get an answer before year end in terms of what we might get on Phase 2. So That's our hope that they'll close the remaining gap, because we're about, as Wendy had said, and she can jump in after me if she wishes, we're at about 65% in terms of becoming whole again, so we still have that last 35%. I have a task team formed that Wendy's working with, and Steve Box in my office with the departmental reps and analysts now looking at all the budget mitigation measures in the event we don't get that funding to close that gap for us heading into 2021. So there's a whole line of parallel work occurring because we don't want to leave it to chance that we'll get money, then we don't get money, then we have to, really retract. So we are working hard to make sure that we have all the solutions on the table available to be able to pull from that menu should we need them.
Okay. And just to clarify, so we're hoping for an answer, is that by calendar year end or fiscal year end?
Sorry, I was on mute. My understanding is it's by calendar year end is what I believe.
Okay.
Wendy, am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in, Steve. It's calendar year end, so we have to make our application, as Mr. Kanalakis said, by the end of October. We will receive notification from the province before the end of December, and funds would flow in early 2021.
Okay. And so the reason I'm probing here is trying to understand through the budget process for 2021 what information we'll have at hand when we're making these decisions. So it seems to me we'll be missing that piece of information still. We'll have made the ask, but we won't know yet what we'll be receiving when we're going through the budget process. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor. And to Mr. Kanalakis' point, what we're doing is we're building that safety net in terms of those financial mitigations to make sure that should we not receive the full $65 million to close our gap, that we've got a plan to fill that gap ourselves.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Another question with respect to the RFI that recently closed for the city looking to acquire hotels, motels, or other types of housing. I know there was a memo sent recently with respect to this, and unfortunately sharing that it was unsuccessful. So my question is, is there additional work underway on this, and are we still pursuing opportunities if they arise to be able to acquire this type of accommodation to help with our housing shortage?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the RFI did close and did not give us a successful opportunity through that. But since that time that the RFO was released, we have had another kind of a series of different types of opportunities that have come forward to the city that we are looking at and exploring. So we've closed off the RFO, that procurement process, and we will now be and are pursuing other opportunities with different organizations in the community, and are still hopeful that we will find either a short, medium, and longer term solution. And with the announcement of the funding, that we can also create a business case for the Social Service Relief Fund, the second installment of that funding, or phase 2 of that funding. That business case is due to the province for that, which has a component of it which is capital. So we are aggressively looking for opportunities to be able to build that into the business case if one of those opportunities requires more capital than we have allocated out of our existing funding as well.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. That's good to hear. I think many of us were disappointed that nothing materialized through that process, but I'm glad to hear it's something that's still being analyzed and pursued, and perhaps even some funding opportunities. A couple of questions quickly for Dr. Etches. I have had some dialogue and some outreach from residents recently, specifically with respect to gyms being open and currently the bylaw not requiring that masks be worn during exercise. And so I think the first question to you is just, do you believe that, using gyms are a high-risk activity?
So the province is the one that set the framework for what type of businesses can be open and included gyms. And they are higher risk because people are breathing harder and they may not be able to wear a mask when they're breathing harder. So I support that we are not requiring people who are exercising vigorously to wear a mask because they need, to be able to get in as much air and oxygen as possible. But if people are doing the type of exercise that does not require breathing hard, if they're doing stretching or other activities that, a mask may be tolerated, and I highly recommend that people wear masks as much as they can tolerate while they're doing that exercise in gyms, because it will make a difference. Ottawa Public Health has specific guidance for this kind of activity, and we know that keeping the 2 meters distance is still really important. So in gyms, keeping that distance between machines, making sure that people don't have to walk too close to others who are breathing heavily. All these aspects will reduce the risk of transmission if somebody's in the environment and has COVID.
Mm-hmm. And I think, one of the scenarios that I've been presented with is around particularly fitness classes, I think, in that perhaps those attending and participating are stationary and are staying in one spot for the most part. Without a mask, there's employees, there's an instructor who needs to be able to run that class safely. And so I do worry about the safety of employees in these facilities as well, and what we're doing to ensure that it is a safe work environment for them.
Yes.
I think OPH has provided some great guidance and documentation through a number of different scenarios around workforces, and I'm wondering if there is a way to strengthen that for our gyms across the city with the lens of employee safety.
Yes, so occupational health and safety is an employer's responsibility, so it's true that gyms should be doing all they can to protect their workers. So workers who can wear a mask should be wearing a mask, and they should be looking at that level of protection, sometimes a face shield as well. So those are elements that we do promote, and we can look. I think you're looking for a specific discussion on occupational health and safety. I think we can add to their resources. I know the province has also been providing occupational health and safety information for all types of workforce settings.
I appreciate that. It does to me still feel like a gap, but I'll continue that conversation offline. One last question for you is with respect to, I know we have the bylaw that we'll be speaking about shortly, and the recommendation to require masks within common spaces, common areas in condos and multi-unit dwellings, which I'm very happy to support and see moving forward. My one concern still remains around elevators. And I know that OPH has a elevator etiquette poster that has been created, and I've received some feedback in my community, and I think because some of these elevators are too small to be able to maintain that 2 meter distancing, that there's still concern about more than one person or one family being in that space. Regardless of mask wearing or not. So I just ask for your comment on that concern.
Sure. When we're trying to prevent transmission of COVID in spaces that are shared, the distance is the first thing, and then the mask is another layer of protection. So it is the case if people are able to wait for the next elevator, we would recommend that rather than sharing an elevator. Of course, that could take a long time in some situations. But this is building by building, I guess problem solving by the operators and the owners. We have tried the voluntary approach of encouraging good practices and making recommendations and making resources available. It hasn't been picked up everywhere, and so this bylaw is the next step to demonstrate that this is important. Wearing the mask will help in the elevator setting, but if there are more, if there's more problem solving needed, we do take calls, and we can reach out to help people with their particular setting.
Terrific. No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that's gone into most recently feeding into that bylaw amendment, and I think it's a great step looking at our common spaces in these buildings. I do still have concerns about, it's probably a unique scenario here, but I will follow up with respect to the elevator signage and issue. But thank you very much for the great work you're doing. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions for Dr. Etches. Just want to follow up first on something that Councillor Tierney raised around changing the dashboard and putting in zones, I think is the term he used. First a question, then a comment. So the question is an area, just because I live in an area and I have COVID, is that necessarily reflective of where I may have picked up the virus in the first place?
I think the maps are produced based on people's addresses. So people who have experienced a COVID-19 positive test, so that's what data we use to map, is that the addresses of residents. We don't have perfect information about all the exposures. People are not able to specifically recall exactly where they might have been exposed, often in at least 25% of the time. And then sometimes there's overlap, because if it's in someone's household that they've been exposed to COVID, then that would be the same as their address. But it would be different if it was an outbreak, say, in a place of work or a daycare that's in a different setting. So there is a difference. Yeah.
So and I thought that was going to be your answer, and so to build on that with a quick comment, I think that's why it's important that we don't focus too much on where the individual lives that was tested, because you don't want to give people a false sense of security that this is an area where there may be a high incidence of people living with COVID, so I'm safer in this area, and I don't necessarily have to wash my hands. I don't necessarily have to wear a mask. So I for one am supportive of the approach that we currently use. I think it sends a stronger message that as we've said from the beginning, we're all in this together, and you can pick up COVID in Carp, and you can pick up COVID in Cumberland, and anywhere in between. And therefore, everybody has to be vigilant and follow the COVID-wise rules, I think, wherever you happen to be. And I wouldn't want to take away from, I think that's the most important base message that public health has out there. The other question I had for you is you've had an opportunity to answer a lot of questions about school openings, but so far the information has been more focused on elementary and secondary schools. I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about and maybe share what public health is currently doing or may be doing in the future to address the fact that post-secondary institutions will be opening, and while many classes will be virtual, a number will be in person, and we will have an influx of new students into the city over the next few weeks. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that emerging issue.
Certainly, the universities and colleges in Ottawa have been outstanding in their approach to add in protections and change the way they do things, considering COVID transmission needs to be limited. So they've proceeded with their own mask requirements. They've shifted as much to virtual learning as possible. The universities in particular, it's dramatic, the drop in number of students that will be on campus. And the colleges have done as much as possible as well, where there's more hands-on learning. But they are looking to maintain the physical distancing, in classrooms as well, even with hands-on learning. They're limiting people on campus in buildings who don't need to be there. So I'm really pleased with the work they've done. We've been working with them to advise them. We'll continue to meet with the colleges and universities regularly. Also working with student associations. So we know that the socializing and behaviors that happen with the return to school could pose a risk, and so we've been working with organizers of Frosh Week activities, which will be mostly virtual, and making sure that student associations are also helping us to promote messaging about socializing more safely. So we have party safe messaging. We are always interested in making sure as people start up their college or university lives that we're doing this in a fun but and a safe way. So I think this is an active conversation. Universities and colleges will be helping us to communicate further as people arrive. If it looks like there's a situation where things are needing to be addressed due to a larger gathering, people not taking the precautions, and we do have conversations underway with our bylaw and police partners so that they could be able to help address anything that might be posing a greater risk for transmission of COVID-19. Because this is an age group where we do see some more of the tests turning positive, we want to encourage students to continue to do the right thing and make sure if they are sick that they do continue to present for testing, and that way we can do the follow-up required and make sure that it doesn't go further.
Dr. Etches, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And next is Councillor Gower, please, from Stittsville. Look forward to my tour of his ward on Friday. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question's for City Manager, Mr. Kanellakos. First of all, I wanted to share, over the summer, I have found city staff to be very responsive, and in particular for core services. I have not noticed a drop-off for solving resident problems. It's been a very, very strong few months for city staff, given everything that they're working against and all the changes. What I wanted to ask is, on the area of people, how are you, on an ongoing basis, planning to assess things like productivity or mental health and really understand how well or how not well staff are adapting to the changing situation?
No, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for the kind words. I think our staff have been exceptional through this entire period. I don't think anybody would have noticed the drop in service, so I'm very proud of them. And we have a task team, it's a people task team. We created 5 task teams several months ago, human services being one of them, the most prominent one. But we have a people task team, and Valerie Turner, our general manager of Innovative Client Services, and the team there are reviewing and have implemented, we've changed dozens and dozens of policies, and we've also given our managers tools in terms of how to ensure that they're checking in on the mental health and what resources they can offer the employees. We're doing virtual training. We're looking at all of our managers and supervisors have contacted every one of our 17,000 employees to check in on them in terms of where they're at. I'm very proud of the fact that during the pandemic, at peak, I think we just had over 500 employees, of total 17,000 employees, who were available to be redeployed. Well, actually, their work was impacted in a way they couldn't do it. We're down to about 35 right now, and in 2 weeks, the senior leadership team, the general manager and myself, will be reviewing the policy decisions and directives on how we're going to deal with any employees who are having issues with productivity, mental health, wanting to come back to work because the home circumstances aren't ideal. So we're about to launch that this month. But we've been very active in evolving and modifying all of our practices to ensure that all of our employees are contacted and that we ensure that our employees are productive and get the resources they need through the AP or any of the other resources we've been putting out in our communiques all summer.
And are there any specific aspects right now where you have a concern? What will be the biggest challenges in terms of, say, mental health going forward for this?
Yeah, we did. We've initiated a number of pulse checks, mini surveys to our staff, and we're doing another one in about 2 weeks to the broader employees. We did one with our managers and our supervisors, and the biggest challenge, of course, for them is the realization that not everybody, and I think we're seeing this in the broader media, not everybody, a lot of people thought working from home was a panacea. If you could ever get to that point, it'd be fantastic. Well, that's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people actually want to come back to the office, and we're trying to accommodate that, even though we're trying to keep people working from home. That was one big learning in that a lot of people do want to come back. The other thing that people were finding difficulty, obviously, was the virtual meetings and the contact. They found that very, very exhausting. So we're trying to work around that with some other tools and some other practices. And they really felt that the loss of connection and communication with their peers was impacting their mental health, and the fact that they were confined to the house, especially in the early days. So a lot of our managers now are, we're encouraging them to have virtual coffee meetings and other things where you're not necessarily doing work. So we keep in touch with people. But overall, one of the things that was great about the survey is our staff, our managers, and our supervisors really felt that the city did a great job communicating with them and supporting them through this. They're also making appointments now to pick up their technology and their ergonomic work equipment, their chairs. All those things can be signed out and brought home so that they have proper equipment. That was another issue. A lot of people were struggling working at the dining room table or at the kitchen table or at the counter in amongst, with poor chairs and the impact that has over a period of time, especially our office workers. And so we've been making hundreds and hundreds of adjustments to try and accommodate our staff to deal with the psychology and the isolation, psychological and isolation that they've been experiencing, the ones that have had to stay from home. So we have a real split right now of people who want to come back and want to get back in the office, and there's a number of people who really enjoy working from home when they want to stay at home, and so we are checking with each employee to see how's that going to work, and we're going to use this fall to fine tune that. That's why we wanted as many to stay at home as possible, so that we can fine tune it and prepare ourselves for the new year.
Okay, thank you. One thing I miss, I'll share, is the informal or casual conversations that councillors get to have with staff in the cafeteria or before a committee meeting. It's something that I've really missed. And yesterday we did have a in-person Board of Health meeting, and I saw right away through a couple of conversations really the extent to what we've missed out on by not having those opportunities for contact. I want to just very quickly ask Dr. Etches the same question. For your team, Dr. Etches, how is your team holding up? How is the general health of your team, and what are your plans to support them as we go into the fall?
Thank you. We have pretty fatigued teams, and so we're looking at ways to spread out the workload and create more sustainable structures for organizing the work. We've had to grow our workforce by about 20%, and that, of course, people need the right support from their supervisor, and so we're looking at actually all of these aspects, as well as continuing to use our Wellness at Work group, which is made up of team members from across Ottawa Public Health, where we've identified, that from from employees as well as managers ideas to promote our health and wellness. So like Mr. Kanalakis, we're really promoting awareness of the supports that exist through the city and in our community for mental health as well. And we know that we have the same support from the city's HR team. So we really appreciate that. Again, to problem solve around working from home, if that's the better option for people. We are feeling the same kinds of things around some of the limits to all of the online work, and so we are trying to have some in-person meetings. It's a challenge, as you saw yesterday. Not the same when you're distanced and you're talking through a mask. So there are limits. This is definitely stretching us, and we're all as senior leaders trying to role model taking some time off and make sure that team members across are taking some vacation as well and preparing to continue to have breaks into the fall.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Councillor Menard, please.
Thanks very much, Mayor. And if you hear some drilling in the background, I apologize for that. There's some stuff going on around here. So I just wanted to thank staff as well. The frontline services, like Councillor Gower has said, have not stopped. They've been fantastic and responsive throughout the summer and have really done a fantastic job of dealing with resident concerns and being responsive to councillor interests. So really appreciate all the work. That goes for public health, but also our frontline staff and the rest of the organization. So thank you to staff for all you've done throughout this time. One issue I wanted to raise, similar to Councillor Suds, was around the affordable housing and homes for houseless people in Ottawa. I think originally we had about $3 million we were looking to use for acquiring or providing homes to people. Since we've got the recent announcements around the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative of $150 million, and then the announcement of the Safe Restart Agreement, the city will be eligible for an allocation of $18 million or 17.9 under the new allocation. So I'm just wondering, will more of that funding be used to look at long-term options to help people who are currently houseless?
Thank you, Councillor. As you can appreciate, the current situation of, addressing homelessness right now and the impact of homelessness on people who are experiencing homelessness has been quite challenging. And so we've had to really focus our efforts on, first and foremost, mitigating those ongoing risks for vulnerable people, especially individuals living in congregate care settings, as well as maintaining a response, because we do know that we need to continue to sustain our emergency response to make sure that we have physical distancing spaces and isolation centers, and also enhance our street outreach services, because we want to make sure that our continued safe operation of our shelters through the pandemic continues into the winter until we see the situation potentially changing. We're also looking at supporting particularly in the community, we are seeing that both Indigenous peoples and racialized communities are experiencing significant impact. So we want to make sure that those community organizations and those services are available to those individual communities and neighborhoods. And then we need to look at and predicting kind of what is that second surge of capacity we need to have on the ground. So, we are prioritizing those first. We do want to look at medium to long-term solutions. So when we look at what's the cost of that sustainment of those services, we also want to, if we can, carve out an amount of money to look at more sustainable solutions. But we think that that's going to potentially be an additional ask, not necessarily totally contemplated in that $17.8 million.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess, despite the memo we received about the value of some of those hotels submitted to date to the city, it seems like staff do believe that other hotels or motels or multi-residential properties could present good value. I'm just wondering, how is that work being conducted? Are you actively outreaching to homes on the market? Is it that you're still just soliciting folks to come and submit something, or how is that work being done?
So we have a number of kind of different strategies that are happening at the same time. Our real estate group at the city is actively looking at other organizations that have real estate in the city and is pursuing any available facility that may come available given the pandemic that we might be able to use for an alternate facility. We've also had a number of individual groups and individual operators come forward after the RFI closed. They may not have potentially seen it in time, so they've come afterwards. That's a combination of hotels and other spaces. So we're looking at those as well. And as well, we've had a housing blitz that we've been working with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, which is a partnership with the Alliance and our housing services group to prioritize particularly women and families, and to focus housing and housing providers who may have a whole range of services and homes that they would have available just for individual placement, that we could also use and prioritize our subsidies as well, because ultimately for us, the best solution is to get somebody a house. So we're maximizing our subsidies and our housing allowances to be able to do that. And then looking at the longer term in terms of how do we continue to build affordable housing. So we're continuing to work on right now our long-range financial plan around how do we support Ottawa Community Housing to continue to do the good work that they're doing in terms of their building of affordable housing and supporting them, as well as building a long-term financial plan of what we will need in order to be able to sustain building affordable housing into the future.
Okay, thank you very much for that response, and for Councillor Sudd's intervention on this, as well as Councillor McKenney and the Mayor and Councillor Fleury. So I think this is an important priority of what we can do together during this time. Despite the difficulty, there are opportunities that come up, so I appreciate that. And Mr. Mayor, my last point, I just want to thank Councillor Eglai, as well as Dr. Edges for the retreat yesterday with the Board of Health. That was very productive, and the new priorities that are coming in that, similar priorities to what we had, but integrating the response that we need during this time to the pandemic. So really great to be with everyone there and that work. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. Next is Councillor Leeper, please. Good morning.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning. Very briefly, Dr. Etches, I know a couple of councillors have raised the importance of trying to get testing into the neighborhoods in a bit more granular way so that people can walk to testing. There are a fair number of people who live downtown who don't have access to cars, and I am hearing from them about their frustrations in terms of going to get tested. Anything that you can do with our healthcare partners to ramp up testing and to make it more granular and walkable for residents right across Ottawa would be greatly appreciated. The second comment that I would make is with Mr. Kanellakos, I am concerned. I've begun reaching out to our school principals today to talk about school reopenings and traffic. I think we can anticipate that a number of people are going to start driving their kids to school. We've heard about the potential that school transportation might not be available. Is there any help available to us as councillors if we start to see some very localized traffic issues around school drop-off?
And John Manconi on the line? Because I know we were talking about school buses and transportation yesterday. John?
I think Pat Scrimsher's on the line.
Pat on the line?
I'm here, Steve. John had to step away.
Okay, thanks,
our traffic operations center will be up and running and, through the entire return to school period, as well as all of our transit operations that I'm more closely associated with. And if there's anything specific that we can help with, we'll be happy to.
Okay, I'm wondering about the availability of things like bylaw officers and working with police to ensure that we have some flex resources for the first few mornings of school reopening as everyone gets used to a new normal.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I can help reassure Councillor Leeper. Yes, the team has been working with our traffic management colleagues and Ottawa Police, and we do have bylaw officers and police are also targeting known areas, but to your question, if you have granular issues in your community, please let us know and we can adjust those resources. And we recognize that particularly this year may be a very different year, so what we're normally used to may not be the areas where there'll be problems because of COVID and the change in behavior. So we're on top of it and specifically targeting that. We don't want any untoward issues happening as we return to school.
We know that some schools are going to be asking parents to drop their kids a little further away from school, maybe not directly in front of it, as they try to manage the distancing as kids enter the school. Is there the potential that we can, do a quick road closure, things like that, in order to try to, just be really nimble on the ground?
Yeah, those are all options that the officer on the scene has the command authority to do that, the police and bylaw too, so they would coordinate and I know you understand it's a very dynamic situation every morning, so we're focusing a lot of energy on that for the first few weeks, absolutely.
Okay, will crossing guards be in place for school opening?
Yes, all the normal resources will be there.
Perfect. That's all I had. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Conseiller Cloutier, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Gower asked some of my questions, so thank you very much. Councillor Bernard made some of my comments about the Board of Health retreat yesterday. I certainly want to echo and thank Mr. Kanellakis and the staff at the city for their work throughout the summer, and certainly to Dr. Etches, as I said yesterday, and her colleagues at OPH for all the work. And Chair Eglai has also been instrumental this summer. And I appreciate the point that he made. He made a point that I wanted to make about the hotspots and the dashboard, that we can get COVID anywhere and we have to be vigilant everywhere. And that is important. The only question I had left on my list was to Dr. Etches. Do you have any comment, any insight with respect to, I recognize it's a federal initiative, the COVID app that has been provided? Is there any information within OPH with respect to the number of downloads and any data on its effectiveness in detecting or containing the transmission of COVID?
Thank you. We're still pursuing that information. We don't have any numbers yet on the proportion of Ottawans that are using the COVID app, but we're looking for that. We do promote it. It is an app that is easy to use, easy to download. It doesn't collect your location. It doesn't go into your contacts and let people know anything. So we do think it's another tool that can help us. The information, will prompt, there's alerts that might prompt somebody to go get tested for COVID or to phone public health for advice if they've been in contact with somebody else who's tested positive for COVID. And that we are seeing. We are getting a few referrals like that. And then, we have to work through them.
Okay. Thank you. And those are all of my questions. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. I just want to pick up on the issue of crossing guards. I'm receiving, as I'm sure many others are, people looking for additional crossing guards, especially this year as we were sending our kids back to school, and there is more interest in having kids walk to school this year. So, is there any attention being provided, or any additional funding available for additional crossing guards come September, which is tomorrow, really around the corner?
Councillor, I'll find out more about that, and we'll get back to you.
Okay.
Have that information.
Sure. And just in the interim, who should we be? Should I just wait for you to get back? Is that something that maybe we'll want to share with council? I just want to make sure that as we're being asked, we have a response back that that we're providing, not giving people any indication that we're increasing the number of crossing guards if in fact we aren't. So as soon as possible that we can get that information. Because there are some intersections, I know in the downtown, that are particularly problematic that I'd be looking for some help with in getting kids to school. And just to Dr. Etches, and Doctor, I did raise this with yourself and staff, and I got a great response back, but I feel that it's something that we need to continue to discuss in terms of the risk factors and the granularity of the information that we're getting back. I mean, it's one thing to look at, where the infections, the addresses of people who are contracting COVID are. I don't find that particularly helpful necessarily, except to understand neighborhoods that are at higher risk. But it's more about the activities that are higher risk. And I'll tell you what my key concern is that when we talk about, for example, 20 to 29-year-olds and having, since the opening of stage 3, having higher incidences of COVID, we sometimes, I think, default to, they might be having social activities that are more parties or, getting together with friends. But this is also the demographic that is often precariously employed. They might work in pubs and restaurants and in other places where they're at a higher risk. And I just think it's really important that we understand that. I mean, I know we don't want to blame. Blame won't help with addressing where this is happening. But I think that for two reasons. One is we need to know, is close contact, does that equal a close work contact? Is that, or is it, is it actual parties? Are people, yesterday, for example, I was on the train, I was on LRT coming home. I felt perfectly safe. Mind you, there was only one other person on the train. And I don't know if people are staying off of transit because they feel unsafe. And if in fact, people are not contracting COVID on transit, it just seems like that's the type of information that we should have available so that people can make better decisions about how they travel, where they go. Again, there's, the hand washing, the distancing, the mask wear, all of that is very important. But, if people are not contracting COVID, say in restaurants, it's something I think that we, might want to understand better and message out. If I could just get your advice on that.
Sure. I think at the bottom line, what I'm hearing is a desire for more detailed information as much as we can about the exposures that people have, broken down further by where is the close contact occurring. And yes, we'll try to describe that more for you. Knowing that there's a percentage where we just can't always find the source. So what we have not seen is we have not found an outbreak in a restaurant. We have not found an outbreak in a bar. I believe, and I don't I don't have the details. In the news, there was a case related to an employee in a gym, but we have not had an outbreak in a gym. We have not linked transmissions to a rider on a OC Transpo service. We are working, of course, with OC Transpo on the drivers, and these situations are always complex. People have multiple exposures. So, the drivers have household exposures where someone in the home had COVID. There's a lot of things happening, and our team definitely, I want to give credit to the investigators. They are walking through the details of people's lives and their activities and trying to pull out this information. Of course, also as a priority, focusing on who are the contacts so that we can stop onward transmission, but we're also hearing the desire and the need to go backwards in time as well and try to identify sources. So we'll keep working on that and communicating about that. I think on the whole, is where people come within 2 meters of others without masks being used. We are not seeing outbreaks in settings where people are wearing masks. That's good. That's good news, right?
Absolutely. It's excellent news, and I think just people knowing
30
that
seconds,
gives
Councillor.
them the confidence to to go back into some businesses that are suffering today, or to do the activities that going on to our transit. It's that I'm looking at. It's not about blame. It's about understanding where and how we can keep each other safe, and mitigating the impacts of the shutdown. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that your staff are doing, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And our last colleague to ask questions is Councillor Meehan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would reiterate my colleagues' appreciation of the staff over the summer. I, too, have found them extremely responsive, so I appreciate that. I guess my question is, first of all, to Dr. Etches. Dr. Etches, where are we in terms of the saliva test?
My understanding is that Health Canada is reviewing an application to look at whether they can approve one company's saliva-based test for COVID-19. That's very welcome. Really look forward to that tool.
And would you say that we'd be very receptive to using the saliva test if once it's approved?
So I need to know the parameters of it, how sensitive it is to pick up COVID, how specific it is that when it's a positive test, it's definitely likely to be COVID. Those elements of the test, the characteristics of the test matter when you apply it to a population level. You don't want too many false positives or too many false negatives, for example. But I know that our partners at Public Health Ontario are typically the leads in providing guidance around COVID tests and testing, and they would probably be helping us determine the best use of new tools that are available.
And would we be ready, to analyze that data if we were to implement the use of the saliva test?
Yes. So this is something all of our provincial colleagues are interested in. I know it would be a top priority if there's something available that's useful to get it rolled out.
Okay. Do you have any inside information? You know how fast?
I don't. Sorry.
Okay. Another thing, as we're going back to school, I'm just wondering if any, I'm sure that there has been a lot of thought go into this. Any thought in getting a baseline for all the schools? Should all the kids and the teachers be tested, say, a week before they go back to class? So you have a baseline, so that when the kids, everybody that's going to be back in there has had a negative test. And it gives us like a baseline to work from. Are we thinking about making that mandatory at any point?
So we have absolutely considered what role would testing play before children start school, and we have concluded that there is no role for that kind of across-the-board testing for children or staff before they go back to school. It is something that doesn't it's not likely to yield very much. For one thing, the rate of COVID in our population is very low. And so the chances that we would pick something up are low, and so it would cause likely more difficulty in trying to get everybody tested and understand if we did pick something up, is that really truly a relevant positive. We would do the follow-up as usual, of course, but my point is we've learned from the testing of broad populations, like all the residents or visitors in a long-term care home, or whole populations of workers in certain sectors, and where there's not a expectation that somebody's been exposed to COVID, there's not a known exposure, we're typically not finding COVID.
Okay.
We're finding COVID when we test when there's a risk, when there's an exposure that we know has happened, and we want to make sure that we find it. So this testing of asymptomatic people is no longer recommended on a broad scale just to see what's there. It is really something where we want to use our testing to be targeted to identify further cases if there is a risk, if there's one situation where someone is infected, to follow up with the close contacts. That's the priority. The other reason we've ruled it out, and we're telling people you don't need a COVID test before you go back to school, is because when you get that test done, you might be infected, and it would still be negative if you were just infected a few days prior, and you might get exposed and become infectious after the test came back negative before school starts. So it's just really information about one point in time, and it doesn't definitively rule anything in or out. I know it'd be nice to be able to be sure ahead of time, but what we need people to do to be as careful as we can about keeping COVID out is stay home when you're sick. Okay. So it's the staying home staff, students, parents doing the monitoring every day actively. We know it could be a headache, it could be a mild symptom, and we just have to take those a bit more seriously until we figure out how to balance all of this into the fall.
Okay, I thank you for that, and I am reassured that because the numbers are so low when it comes to that cohort of students. So I hope that reassures some parents as well. My next question, and thank you, that's it for you, Dr. Richards, and thanks again for everything you've done over the summer. I know you must be exhausted. Just a question for our city manager, Steve Kanalakis. Mr. Kanalakis, you said that one of the things that you're doing is working with collective bargaining with the unions going ahead. Can you give me some insight into, are you asking for some concessions? Are we looking ahead maybe at staff reductions? Exactly, can you just explain what you're looking at there in terms of...
Maybe I'll put some context in my comments on the collaboration with the unions. The real issue is the ability to redeploy staff. Okay. And right now, the way the collective agreements are established, it's very difficult to move people between different jobs and between different collective agreements. So that's not possible without the union agreement, the association agreements. And so we had an arrangement with them when COVID first throughout this, where they waived their objections in consultation with them, where we could move staff around. So, when I talked about those 500 and some staff who were at home and their jobs were impacted, we were able to redeploy almost all of them into our shelters, into long-term care, into different areas, or into public health, where we had surge requirements for staff. And so some of those staff are still there, in fact. And the unions were very good in helping us do that on a dime. The province gave us the authority to do that, because the orders that were issued. But we felt it was important to do it in collaboration, and it brought a lot of goodwill. So we want to extend that going forward and have that same kind of level of cooperation with our unions, and we're in discussions with them. On the second piece on concessions and collective agreements and savings and layoffs and all those things, the collective bargaining process for all of our unions other than ATU, which just settled, all has an arbitration process built into that process. So the ability to ask for concessions or to make any changes to the collective agreements is done at the bargaining table. And if there is an agreement there, it'll be before an arbitrator in terms of settling what we ask for. So that's a longer process. The issues around, I think what you're getting at, Councillor, is, how are we going to find savings? And that's our biggest chunk of expenditures is in our compensation. Well, those are all the things what I mentioned earlier. We have a task team looking at all the financial mitigation measures to close the gap from what the federal and provincial government has given us and what we need to balance our budget. And you'll see that in the fall as we table the budget, what the options are for council to look at in terms of bringing the budget in the balance for 2021. And so you will have a list of things that we would be putting before you that you can pick from to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, I guess that answers my next question, because I was thinking if the team that's looking to mitigate this spending going forward, if we are successful, or if we're lucky enough, that another level of government will kick in that 63% we're missing in order to cover the deficit. What do we?
It's 35%. Yeah.
Like, if we're lucky enough to get that, we should. I would propose that we continue on with the cost saving measures so that we can bring down the spending for the next year's budget. So you've answered that. So we're going to have an array of options before us.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, that's it for me, and thank you, and happy anniversary, Mr. Kanellakis. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think I saw Councillor Fleury's name come up and then go off the screen. Councillor, do you have a... No? Okay. Okay, colleagues, we'll just go through the consent agenda then. Item number 2, temporary mandatory mask bylaw. We'll come back to that because we have brief presentation and a comment by the chair of the committee. City Clerk, Greffier Municipal status update inquiries received. Committee reports, Community and Protective Services Committee report number 12, rapport numéro 12, the Comité des services communautaires de la protection, rental housing, property management. We have a motion on that, so we'll come back to that one. Councillor Fleury, did you have your hand up again?
I just wanted to have a question for the item.
Yeah, we're going to come. We're just doing the consent agenda now. Okay, next item is item number 5, Accessibility Advisory Committee 2020-2022 Work Plan, Comité consultatif sur l'accessibilité. Council approved the Accessibility Work Plan. Carried. Thank you to Councillor Luloff, our representative on the committee. Next is Build Heritage Subcommittee Report number 14, rapport numéro 14 de sous-comité de patrimoine, application for demolition and construction at 189 Stanley Avenue. Carried. Item 7, application to alter the Booth Street Bridge, 9 Fleet Street. Carried. Does anyone wish to remove anything from the bulk consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, there's 2 commemorative namings from my ward. I just wouldn't mind just a minute for each, just to acknowledge the individuals, because in normal course the family would be in the audience, that sort of thing. So I could do it now, or I could hold it till later. It's up to you. I won't be long with either one.
Why don't you do it now?
Okay, I'll do it now. Thank you. So the first is item number C, which is the commemorative naming of the Sandy Ruxtell Gridiron at the Nepean Sportsplex. Just very quickly, Sandy passed away a couple of years ago. He has been involved with minor league football for youth in our city at the time of his death for over 30 years. He was a force to be reckoned with in terms of putting kids first, making sure that any kid that wanted to play could play. He was a great ally in moving forward initiatives for young people in the city. And just a quick anecdote, just to show you how devoted he was to youth football. he was a federal government employee that was offered the opportunity to have work experience in London, England. And he said, "No, I can't do that. I'll miss the football season, and I won't be there for the kids." So just a real giant in that area, and I just wanted to say that about him, and thank everybody at Bolton staff for helping in moving that forward quickly. And the next is the naming number F on the agenda, which is George Brancato Park, which would be changing the name of Banner Park in Trent, Arlington to George Brancato Park. And I'm not going to say anything about George that people don't already know. I think CFL Coach of the Year, brought the Grey Cup to Ottawa when he coached the Rough Riders, had a successful playing career of his own. And George's house backs right onto the park. He has a close connection. His family has a close connection with the park. And again, very well received the suggestion by the community to name the park after George. And again, I'd like to thank staff for the work in moving this through as quickly as they did in these COVID conditions. And again, thank all of you for your support in this naming. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you very much. So on the bulk consent agenda as presented, carried, adopté, merci. So our first item that we're going back to is under Emergency and Protective Services, Service de Protection et d'Urgence, temporary mandatory mask bylaw update. Councillor Suds has some opening comments, and then we'll ask Mr. DeMonte to do and Dr. Etches to do a brief presentation, then open it up for questions. Chair Suds.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to acknowledge the effort and the amount of diligence and work that Mr. DeMonte and his team, as well as we know Dr. Etches and her team have undertaken. I think that the mask bylaw as it's being put forward with some minor tweaks will certainly go a long way to continue to protect citizens throughout our city. So just a big thank you for the work that's gone underway, and of course my support for it as put forward.
Great, thank you. So Mr. DeMonte and Dr. Etches, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chair, for those kind words. Today, the Medical Officer of Health and I are recommending that Council approve an extension of the temporary mandatory mask bylaw until October 31st, 2020 inclusive. Aujourd'hui, le personnel recommande au Conseil municipal d'approuver la...
We're recommending that you extend the period for the obligatory wearing of a mask.
This bylaw has been a useful tool in our toolkit to limit the spread of COVID-19. We've seen more people wearing masks in our community, and it is likely that without this mask use, recent increase in people diagnosed with COVID-19 would have been much worse. Bylaw and Regulatory Services has administered and enforced the provisions of the bylaw since its approval, and has received over 470 related service requests and issued 160 verbal warnings and only one charge for contraventions. Bylaw Regulatory Services also continue to work collaboratively with our Transportation Services Department for public transit property, as well with Ottawa Public Health on awareness and bylaw requirements of public health and safety objectives. From the onset, OPH has been monitoring the pandemic closely and regularly updating guidance and protocols based on the most up-to-date scientific evidence, the latest data and expert opinion. It is on this basis that we are also proposing some amendments to the temporary mask bylaw in two main areas. The first is that staff is proposing that the bylaw be amended to require that persons entering or remaining in enclosed common areas of condominiums and multi-unit residential buildings be required to wear a mask. And further, building operators must post signage at every entrance of the premises advising the mask requirement, and that they assure the availability of alcohol-based hand sanitizer at all entrances. Le personnel propose que le règlement soit modifié.
Staff is proposing that the bylaw be modified to require disinfectant at building doorways as well as requiring the compulsory wearing of masks in condominiums.
Further to the letter sent by the Medical Officer of Health to multi-unit dwelling managers and owners, landlords, condominium corporations, and residential building management companies with a strong recommendation to implement mask policies in relation to common areas. Since that time, OPH and the city has been made aware by both residents and building operators that the policy recommendation approach to mask has not been widely adopted, putting residents of multi-unit buildings at risk, particularly those who are among the most vulnerable of the city's population. As such, the proposed bylaw amendments to require common areas of condominiums and multi-unit residential buildings to require masks, signages, and hand sanitizer simply formalizes an existing recommendation by Dr. Etches and as an additional preventive measure in these enclosed settings where there's an increased risk of transmission. These requirements already apply to most businesses operating in our community under the bylaw, and staff have noted a resulting uptake in mask use and compliance in these settings. Les dispositions proposées s'appliquent déjà.
The provisions proposed are already applied to many businesses in Ottawa and are an extra preventative measure to stop transmission in enclosed areas.
Bylaw amendments is that staff is recommending that council delegate it to the general manager of EPS the authority to identify high-risk areas or zones in the city where masks could be required on specific days of the week or during specific hours of the day. Under the proposed amendments, the general manager of EPS would issue an order to require masks in an unenclosed public space, which would be defined by a legal description and a map. The general manager would also be able to rescind the order accordingly when the risk is sufficiently reduced or eliminated. En vertu des modifications proposées, le directeur général.
The city manager would have the ability to actually issue an order to require the wearing of masks in specific public places.
Associated with the delegated authority will include a written confirmation from the Medical Officer of Health that an order is necessary for the furtherance of public health and safety. As well, notification to the affected ward councillor and the affected business improvement area would be given. The order would automatically expire within 60 days of the date of issuance, unless earlier expiry date is identified and rescinded. Staff do not anticipate that such orders would be imposed frequently for extended periods of time. This delegation of authority is being recommended in order to provide a timely response for the emergence of public health issues identified by Dr. Etches and her team. Le personnel ne prévoit pas que de telles ordonnances.
Staff is not predicting that the use of this order will be very regular. This delegation of authority is designed to allow us to take a swift action to deal with any issues.
Effect immediately upon council approval and will remain in effect until October 31st, 2020. In closing, staff are recommending that council approve an extension of the temporary mask bylaw to meet its public health objectives related to COVID-19. The proposed amendments formalize existing recommendations in multi-unit dwellings and give staff the flexibility to respond quickly should issues emerge in designated unenclosed public spaces, based on council-approved prescribed criteria. Dr. Etches and I would be pleased to take any questions you may have, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Etches, do you have comments, or are you just going to do questions? Just you're on mute.
Happy just to take any questions.
Okay, so questions on the temporary mask bylaw. We have Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate this coming forward. Since we had the mandatory mask bylaw previously for stores, as soon as it came out, I heard from residents in multi-residential buildings saying that they did not feel protected because most of them are seniors, many of them are seniors, and they were worried about going into lobbies and elevators. And I did pass this on over and over again to our team. And we know that Toronto did it right away. What was the reason for the delay? Why didn't we do it earlier with the previous mandatory mask?
Mayor, I think it wasn't a question of delay. It was a question of the timing. When we first initially looked at it, some of our consultation with our legal colleagues, there was some questions there, and they had to consult with their colleagues in Toronto, as well initially with Dr. Etches, and I'll let her speak to it. We were progressing very positively as a community, and there was very positive impact. And as we were learning, as she and her team were learning, as we were observing on the bylaw side, there were some gaps. And then, as you've indicated yourself and other councillors came to us, some of the community were coming to you saying this was an area. So when we were renewing to look at this renewal, because we had to come back to get the bylaw to continue, these are additions that we thought were important to add.
Okay, appreciate it.
And from a public health perspective, we always like to start with, encouragement and education and making sure people have the information to do their part. So for a long time, we've been talking to people about using masks indoors where you can't physically distance in shared spaces. We've written formally to multi-unit dwellings and so this is really the next step when we were hearing that there were still places where the practices hadn't been implemented.
Yes, it's very, very much appreciated. I know I've heard loud and clear that this was a concern. But I'm going to hear again about what if they don't? What if they still don't? What can we do? And that's both building management and individuals, because I know I'm going to be asked, and it's going to ask you.
Yeah, so Mayor, perhaps just a quick comment. As we saw when the business community was asked to do this, and Councillor, you just talked to it, there was a quick uptake right away, and things moved positively. As Dr. Etches said, she identified that this was another need, communicated that. The uptake isn't so much, so now we're hoping this is the next step. So what this does is it gives us tools in our toolkit, and our bylaw officers, based on complaints, can go in and kind of encourage that. And we'll be using the same strategy as Dr. Etches has said, and as we've shown in our data, it's information, and we'll give verbal warnings, but ultimately in more severe cases, but in cases where that's not effective, we now have a tool where we can actually enforce.
Very much appreciated, and I appreciate having the hand sanitizers at the doorways. I expect that will be for all doorways coming into buildings. What about cleaning? Is there anything specific we can recommend to buildings on that as well?
Ottawa Public Health does have recommendations around environmental cleaning on our website, including how to clean laundry facilities that are shared or other shared areas, high-touch surfaces, the types of products recommended. So that's all available on our website.
But we're not putting that in the bylaw. We're just strongly recommending it. Is that the case?
Yeah, we haven't added that component to the bylaw. Again, as Dr. Etches indicated, that is the responsibility of each owner and building operator to realize that we are in a world pandemic and to follow the guidance that public health is telling us. Like for our buildings, Mr. Kanalakis indicated, we've now bought new tools and we've increased our frequency across the board. So it's not in the bylaw per se.
Okay. Well, I know it's appreciated, and I thank you, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Kavanagh's ward and mine are very similar as far as the types of residents that we both represent. And I agree that since we first debated the bylaw, there were almost immediate questions about multi-unit residences and the need in common areas for the mass in these areas. And as the public heard that we would be revisiting the bylaw and considering an amendment to the bylaw to include multi-unit dwellings, which I strongly support, we've heard from condo directors, property managers, people in residence, including my mother who lives in Bay Ward, that there's friction now between residents because there's no bylaw that exists, because people want to see people wearing masks in common areas and people who do not want to wear them. And the main concern is about enforcement. and making sure that people understand that the bylaw has been amended. Yes, there may be posters at the front door, but do we have a plan to inform, educate, encourage tenants or residents in multi-unit dwellings? How are we going to help smooth this over?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The strategy we're going to use is the one we've used with the initial bylaw. We are in contact with different groups, different community groups, with owners and building owners. You indicated the documentation at the front doors will be citing the bylaw. So, and we're going to use our social media and our public health colleagues, but the city, through our public information media, will be letting people know that this bylaw now exists. And then our strategy, Councillor, will be, as we've done previously, and you've just pointed it out, education, information, and trying to achieve compliance. And again, Dr. Etches had already indicated that in her letter of strongly we were hoping that was going to be, but now it looks like we're going to need this tool for those few exceptions, perhaps, that aren't compliant. So to your constituents that are bringing that up, we now have, if this is approved, we will have a tool to be able to enforce.
Thank you. And just to clarify, if passed by council today, it goes into effect today. Is that correct?
It goes into effect immediately, correct.
Okay, thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Conseiller Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Councillor Fleury, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Etches and Mr. Etches, for the work that your teams have been doing on this bylaw. I'm in direct contact with my previous colleagues, lifeguards, for example. I know that those working in municipal swimming pools were worried about people not wearing masks. And they've been very, very pleasantly surprised by the uptake of this measure. I can't talk for all services provided by the city, but be it libraries or OC transport, I think that most people are very sensitive to the fact that they have to wear masks. There have been exceptions, of course, in some buildings, and I think we've made you aware of those incidents. I think that this amendment will be well understood. I think that people understand that it's an enforceable bylaw. I think people understand that all partners, condominium owners, building owners, will make people aware, will have to be told to make people aware that they have to wear masks in common spaces such as elevators and stairwells. I have a question for you, for both of you, in fact. What about behavior in elevators? Is very clearly posted in stores. You have to put your mask on as soon as you go in the store. That's very clearly understood. And I'm in favor of this amendment, of course. I want to make that clear. But would we actually post the same type of information at each elevator? Because you know this is where people congregate. I think that Mr. De Monte is in a better position to answer this question than I am. Posting the requirement to wear a mask in front of every elevator is a possibility. But as Councillor Sudd said, we should perhaps review our messaging to make behavior in elevators clear. Well, that's fine. I'd just like to thank you once again for having contacted Ottawa community housing to restore the relationship and to identify specific risks. I'd like to congratulate you on that. For Ottawa City residents, I think the important thing is that they have to adapt. We don't have all the answers. When we go back to May or even March, I would have never thought that I would have to wear a mask at that point. But now it's become second nature, if you like. So if we remain adaptable and if we remain sensitive to new information, we'll really be able to adapt to the new situation. We'll get used to wearing a mask. There's only a small handful of people who are still fighting against wearing masks. I think we'll have a complete debrief once COVID-19 is over, but for the time being, I think we have to support public health directives and guidelines. Thank you.
C'est tout?
Is that it? Is that everything? Anything else?
Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments. First of all, I want to thank Mr. DeMonte and Dr. Etches. We've had a number of meetings over the last little while over the summer trying to figure out how the initial bylaw was being received, what needed to be done to strengthen it and to enhance our ability to meet our public health goals. So I want to thank both of them and their teams for the hard work that they put in over the summer, and our other city partners, such as the legal department, in coming forward with this new proposal. Secondly, I'd like to thank the residents of Ottawa. I think, as we've heard a number of times this morning, they have responded very positively towards the original introduction of the bylaw. They have come together collaboratively. They've seen the sense of it. And as Dr. Etches said earlier this morning in her report, we're not really seeing that many cases coming from circumstances where people are wearing masks. So we know that there is a positive benefit to mask wearing in public places, especially in enclosed spaces. It has a real impact and effect on how many cases we have to deal with. And as we enter the fall, this becomes even more important. We have, as I said earlier this morning, the new students coming to town for post-secondary. We have our elementary and secondary school students going back to school. We have colder weather where we're not going to be spending as much time outside as we are now. And we have, of course, flu season. As Dr. Etches has pointed out, we've seen evidence coming out of places like Australia that the parameters or the restrictions put in around COVID have actually had a positive impact on the numbers of flu cases occurring in those areas. And, so all of this, I think, quite clearly says that this is something we not only should support, but we need to support. It's going to bolster our ability to deal with COVID and the flu, both, as we enter the fall season. It's going to assist our hospitals that are, going to need to be available for serious COVID cases, for serious flu cases. So for all those reasons, I think this is something we all need to get behind and support and move forward with this. And again, Mr. DeMonte, I think, has made it very clear, this is a tool in the toolbox, but it's a tool we hope to reach for, on very few occasions. And again, what we've seen with the initial rollout, that was the case with the original bylaw. I think it will be the case with this one. I think what residents, especially in multi-residential buildings, were looking for was some clarification, some guidance, some consistency in how things were supposed to work in elevators, in common areas like gyms and party rooms and that sort of thing. We're providing that now. I think people will take that into account and use it as it's meant to be, which is a support It's not meant to be a stick. It's not meant to be something that we're going to be going and looking to impose on people in a proactive way, but we'll be there to support, to provide information. As Mr. DeMonte pointed out, we will have a rollout to go along with this as we did with the first one. And so I thank you all for your support in going forward with this. I think it's the way the city needs to go. And I think it's how we're going to bolster our defenses as we move into the fall and winter in dealing with COVID. And again, going back to basic public health purposes and jobs, flu is something we have to deal with every year, and that's not going away because COVID's there. It's a complicating factor to COVID, and this bylaw, I believe, will help us address both of those circumstances and make our city better able to deal with both of those circumstances as we move forward with our response to COVID. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Eglai. So on the report as presented, carried. Adopted. Next, Community and Protective Services Committee Report number 12, Rental Housing Property Management Bylaw and Rental Accommodation Study Update. Councillor Suds, as chair of the committee, if you'd like to offer comments, and then we'll ask Councillor Luloff, who has a motion, seconded by yourself, and then we'll go into comments and questions by members of council. So Councillor Suds, please.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, an immense amount of work I know went into preparing this work, this report, months of effort in the midst of the pandemic. So a big thank you to Valerie and her team. It's certainly, I think we had a good discussion at committee last week with respect to this report. And the bylaw itself, I do believe, will go a long way in improving the quality of rental housing in our city. Thank you to all the committee members and others who participated last week in the discussion, as well to many stakeholders that contributed, particularly ACORN and EOLA. And I think this is a great example of how we've been able to work together collaboratively to bring forward a bylaw that, again, I think will have a tremendous impact. I know there are a few outstanding issues that are still being advocated for, despite acknowledging that it is certainly come a long way and we've got a strong bylaw in front of us. I did want to reiterate that part of this bylaw does require that landlords put forward or produce a pest control plan, a pest management plan as part of this. And this is our efforts to ensure that pests are dealt with quickly and efficiently. And then lastly, just wanted to mention as well, I know there is a desire to get this bylaw in place as quickly as possible for obvious reasons. But it is a tremendous amount of work. This bylaw needs to be obviously adhered to by not only private landlords, but also our social housing as well. So there's a tremendous amount of work. And so respecting that staff have committed to producing some of the materials by the spring, that will then give our landlords a few months to be able to take that information in and then be able to have the bylaw in place next summer. So with that, again, a thanks to staff and to my colleagues for your engagement on this and to the many stakeholders who have contributed. And I certainly appreciate your support in moving this forward today.
Great, thank you, Councillor Suds. And now, Councillor Luloff, if you'd like to introduce your motion, and if anyone else has any other motions, this is the time. Councillor Luloff, seconded by Councillor Suds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo the Chair's comments. It was wonderful to work with Val and Jared and that policy team. All the work that they produce and have produced since I've become a member of council and before is incredible. I really appreciate how quickly they acted to incorporate the advice of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and namely Philip Turcott, the chair, who is an incredible advocate for accessibility in the city of Ottawa. So quite frankly, while we were in the middle of debate at CPSC on this item, Philip and I were going back and forth on this item. And in less than 4 days, the policy team worked with myself and with the AAC to come up with this amendment that staff supports. Truly appreciate the support of the policy team and of the chair of the committee. Therefore, whereas the proposed rental housing property management bylaw requires landlords and property managers to maintain a registry in respect of any request for accommodation voluntarily made by a tenant, including those related to evacuation from a building, vital service disruptions, or other matters of concern. And this has been called the Special Assistance Registry in the proposed bylaw. And whereas the chair of the city's Accessibility Advisory Committee has provided input to remove or modify the use of the words special and assistance from the context of the proposed registry in order to reflect the rights of persons to request accommodation under the Ontario Human Rights Code, and that these rights are part of the usual course of business rather than a special process. Be it resolved that the proposed rental property management bylaw be amended to 1, remove the expression of special assistance registry wherever it appears in the bylaw and replace it with the expression tenant support registry, and 2, remove the expression special assistance wherever it appears in the bylaw and replace it with assistance. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. So we can have the speakers list back up, please. Thank you. Conseil Fleury, questions and comments on either the motion or the main report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank staff. I think this sets the fundamentals of protecting good quality rental housing in our city. I want to reiterate that the majority of our landlords and tenants have a tremendous relationship. In the instance where that is not the case, it's important to have the right tools that are effective in protecting livable quality units. My question today relates to a specific component of the bylaw, which is the pest management component. When I look at pest management overall, it is challenging for everyone. We recognize that due to levels of barriers, that it be age, that it be physical disability, and other elements, a resident or a tenant might not be able to prepare the unit adequately, which limits the efficacy of treatment or even the potential for treatment. So I wonder if specifically social services, as part of these efforts, is considering some coordinated supports in the instance where a tenant would not be able to prepare a unit for pest management treatment.
Mr. Mayor, I'll defer to Valerie Betlow and her team, who did, as was indicated, yeoman's work on this file for council on that specific item.
Thank you, Mr. DeMonte. Staff did some research in EPS, did some research to see if there were community supports available to tenants who are having difficulty preparing their units. Unfortunately, we did not have much luck in finding affordable or free community-based services to assist tenants. However, I would defer to the Social Services Department to add any further information that they might have on any supports that might be available in the community.
I wonder if we could get comments from either Shelley Van Buskert or Donna on the matter. I'm sorry, I don't want to catch anyone by surprise. I can take it offline afterwards, but I wonder if this is something that Social Services has on their radar.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So absolutely is, and one of the actions in the 10-year housing and homelessness plan is around pest control and support for tenants around pest control. So it will be an action we will be pursuing and looking at more of an integrated social service support to tenants.
Good to hear. Thank you, and I'm glad to support the report, and thank you for committee for the engagement. That was an effective meeting last week.
Merci. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo my thanks to the committee and to the work of Valerie and Jared and the whole team on putting this together. It's a tremendous amount of work, but it's absolutely worth it. This is about giving dignity to renters. It's about making sure that they have their needs looked after, and it shouldn't be haphazard. We've heard from that many landlords are very good in terms of looking after the needs of the tenants, but it's not across the board, and we have to ensure that it is across the board. And I expect that this will help that in so many ways. And part of it, and what I really appreciate about the bylaw is that it's about education and making sure information is available. One of the things, and I think other councillors may have had this issue as well, is we get tenants calling us because they don't know where to turn. They don't know where to turn because they don't know how to reach the property owners, and they don't know what to do. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And they're always taken back about the fact that who's responsible for what. This will make it very clear with the contracts, the going over the list of who's responsible for what, and it's much more clear. I really, really appreciate that it's proactive and preemptive on tenant needs. And a big thank you has to go to Acorn for bringing this forward, particularly for those who are very vulnerable. Right now we have a very tight rental market, and you could just about rent anything in terms of people are very hungry for some place to live, and we need standards. And I want to thank the whole team for the standards that they've raised. And I know that it's going to be a delay, not till next year. Is there any chance that it could possibly be moved up? Because I know that was one stickler, but it's an understandable one. I get it. With all the work that has to be done, that it's not coming into effect till a year from now. But what are we going to do in the meantime, and how can we help tenants in the meantime? Are we going to pump up education to help them right now for their situation?
Mayor, as we had discussed at committee, we arrived at the timing based on consultation with everyone, including our capabilities as city. But we heard loud and clear from many councillors, including this councillor, that people would like it to be moved up. I'll defer to Valerie, and before she answers, just say that we are looking at what can be done, and perhaps, as you suggest, some information can start getting distributed. That could be helpful, but certainly the timelines we feel are already aggressive for us, considering everything that needs to be done, and in fairness for the partners that are involved in this too. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Bietlow again.
Mic on.
Valerie, are you there?
Thank you, Mr. DeMonte. I'll take that question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we looked at developing the timeline for implementation, we consulted with all of the key stakeholders, including landlords and all of our social housing providers. The one-year timeline is considered reasonable from their perspective, given that if you look at a large landlord, somebody who has to prepare 5,000 or even 10,000 individual instruction to tenants documents, plus develop their pest management plans for each of their buildings and their capital maintenance plans for their buildings. It's quite a lot of work that we're putting onto landlords to get the process started. And it's important for us, I think, as a city to set them up for success and make sure that they're equipped with the tools they need to implement. So the process that we would have is after approval of the bylaw, we will begin to develop all of the supporting materials, which we anticipate to have completed early in the spring. The implementation also depends on upgrades to bylaws case management system, which we would expect to be completed around May, according to the timeline for that project. So that really gives landlords a few months between when we make that material available and they can be ready to meet all of the obligations. And it also ensures that we can have all these rules in place before the high rental season hits next September.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for all your work. The thing I find particularly helpful is the registry of locations, rather so that we can follow those areas, those buildings, those units that are particularly problematic. Hopefully, they'll disappear. Thanks very much.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to staff for bringing forward this comprehensive report. I just want to ask if in that consultation, did they also get support from the Landlords Association to this? In particular, Mr. Dickey is well known to most councillors and has been a very balanced voice on the issue of landlord-tenant relations, and so I'm just curious where that consultation went.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. As part of the consultation process, both Mr. Dickey and other groups were consulted, and onto his comments, I'll again let Ms. Bietlo mention where Mr. Dickey stands on this.
Thank you, Mr. DeMonte. Yes, I can confirm that the Eastern Ontario Landlords Organization was a stakeholder that we consulted with throughout the process, including other landlords as well. We received the feedback in particular from Mr. Dickey. It was very helpful in fine-tuning the recommendations that we are proposing today. Mr. Dickey did participate in the meeting last week at CPSC and was supportive of these regulations.
Thank you. Now, I also like the idea that we're including Ottawa Housing in here because it's a major landlord in the city. With respect to the pests, as Councillor Fleury had referenced there, now that they're going to have programs to deal with them and likely some reports back to the city on what they're doing with that, two things come to mind. One being the city's efforts to step up eradication of the rodents in the sewers, and the second one being what happens if we get into an enforcement situation such as, and before Matt jumps out of the seat, too late, if OCH was found to be not in compliant with the bylaw as far as pest control goes, what would then happen?
So, Mr. Mayor,
we charged Matt Fleury with an offense. Matt, you're in charge now.
Okay, then moving on, I now support that.
Mr. Mayor, as the councillor knows, and OCH is a great partner, and they have a lot of complex situations as well too. For all these situations, when we end up in a bylaw enforcement mode, the first thing is to work with the partners, with the owners, with the tenants, to try to first detect where the issue is, bring in pest control experts to target that, and generally we're reasonably successful in that, and that's the same approach here. That said, again, as we've talked earlier about other things, this bylaw now gives us enforcement tools if that's not successful, or if somebody's not collaborating, or we have other challenges. But the objective here is to resolve some of these issues that have been long-standing, and we've heard from renters, and we've heard also from owners as well too, the challenges maybe sometimes with renters as well too. But here we now have a tool to be able to, I think, take us to the next step and start fundamentally resolving some of these issues and that we're seeing in the community. And I don't know if Ms. Bietlo wants to add anything to that.
Anything else, Councillor?
I think that about does it.
Sorry.
Okay.
Councillor, anything else?
Yeah, one more question. Okay. What do we know about the impacts on small landlords. People that have 1 to 5 rental properties in the area. Have they given us any feedback that this might push them out of that whole business and therefore reduce the number of rentals we have available? Because quite frankly, it's those people that are putting up, a portion of their house or an extra house that they have for rent is what's helping us with the vacancy situation. And I'd hate to create a worse situation by pushing them out of the rental industry.
I'll let Valerie answer you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, just like property standards regulations that already exist at the city are applicable to all landlords, the regulations that we're proposing today will also be applicable to all landlords in most cases. Our assessment is that they shouldn't be overly burdensome for small landlords. And in fact, as my colleague Jared just explained, we will be taking the next few months to work very closely with landlords to develop templates to help them meet the requirements of the bylaw. So we'll be providing templates for the various plans that are required under this new bylaw. We'll be refreshing our information that's available on the website in terms of both tenant rights, of course, but also resources for landlords. And so we hope this will go a long way in assisting even the smaller landlords to come into compliance. So we don't anticipate that this will be a problem for smaller landlords, and certainly that has not been flagged to us as being the case.
Okay, that's good to hear. It hasn't been raised as an issue. I've heard from some independent landlords myself, but if it's not being raised as part of the process, then so be it. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for the record, I do support Councillor Fleury's efforts with Ottawa Public Housing and think he's doing a great job.
Right, thank you. Excuse me, Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is a question I think for Mr. Chapman, if he's on the line. Mr. Chapman, one things we heard about during the discussion and debate at the committee meeting, and we've heard about somewhat since then, is the circumstances that apparently exist now where someone can move into a brand new apartment and unknowingly that apartment, that unit is already infested with bed bugs or cockroaches. And what a horrible experience that is, as you just are starting out on a new chapter in your life, so to speak, to be confronted with that. What in the new bylaw will prevent that sort of circumstance from occurring, where a landlord is apparently renting out space that already has a bug or infestation issue? How can we address those concerns that were raised by people at committee?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I guess, to start with, it's the pest management plan that's required. We're hoping that this will create more of a preventative measures so that landlords are taking action before infestations spread to other units. And so we're hoping that that'll control in the days going forward. Where infestations do occur and we have outstanding complaints and tenants have moved out and vacated a unit, the issue for us, or the challenge for us, is getting access. So the only ability we have to get access back into that unit to verify whether the infestation's been dealt with or not is with the landlord's permission. So when we're dealing with infestation issues, we often keep those complaints open until we can get access and verify that's been dealt with, but that's not always the case. We don't always get cooperative landlords. So the other thing that I can add is the database, the searchable database that's being created as part of this new regime. So we're hoping that this will give the tenants or prospective tenants the ability to search the database to see if there's outstanding complaints or infestation concerns that they should be aware of before renting from any landlord.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chapman. Will the searchable database only show an open file in that regard, or will it show a previous interaction with bylaw that's been closed?
Mr. Mayor, the searchable database will reflect open files as well as previous call history.
So when someone's shopping around for a place, they'll be able to do a search about a particular landlord or a particular building to determine what the status is vis-a-vis infestations.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct, yes.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. Much appreciated.
Great. Thanks, Councillor. And Councillor Luloff, to wrap up on your motion.
Sure. Just one quick question to staff, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Okay.
So it's really great that our policy team worked with the EOLO, really good organization. I've had several conversations with other smaller time landlords, like Tony Miller and Dan Doré, about this proposed bylaw. I just have a quick point of clarification, just a question on the thresholds that were established, 10 units, and 3 stories and above. There are quite a few really small-time mom-and-pop landlords that own triplexes all across the city that are now, under this bylaw, forced to put together a capital maintenance program, which may not be required in a small triplex, right? I mean, like replacing, a window or replacing a broken appliance. You shouldn't require, a long-term capital maintenance plan. But maybe I'm wrong, and I'm just wondering how those thresholds were established.
Mr. Mayor, we established those thresholds in part by looking at the history of complaints around property standards in rental properties. So staff's assessment is that the threshold of 3 stories or more, or 10 units or more, was appropriate for the Ottawa context. I note, though, just as a point of clarification, that replacing an appliance would not be part of the capital maintenance plan.
Okay.
Capital maintenance plan is for those larger capital systems in a building that when they do malfunction, when they're not maintained, when no preventative maintenance has gone into them or planning, it affects more than one person, more than one family, hence the 3-story or more threshold.
Well, pardon my terrible example, but I really appreciate your answer and the work that you've done on this. I encourage my council colleagues to support this bylaw and to support the amendment that Chair Suds and I have brought forward to ensure that the language is acceptable to our accessibility community. Great work on this, Val, Jared, and your team, and thank you so much for caring about renters in our city.
Great, thank you. I think that's it on this. So, Councillor, we have the motion of Councillor Luloff, seconded by Councillor Suds. Carried.
Carried.
And on the main report as amended. Carried?
Carried.
Thank you all, and it's very, I think I can certainly tell you that the staff very much appreciate the kind comments, because obviously working under the challenging conditions of COVID and getting this report out, and Councillor Suds doing a very good job shepherding it through is very much appreciated. And I know a number of councillors put a lot of effort into this this report and this issue, which is serious, given the quality of life that is affected by those people living in substandard conditions and landlords who are not being responsible citizens. So thank you all for your positive comments towards our staff, and thank you to the staff for a job well done. So motion to adopt reports, motion portant adoption de rapport, Councillor El Shantiri, please. Seconded by Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That the report from Ottawa Public Health and the Emergency and Protective Services Department entitled Temporary Mandatory Mask Bylaw Update, Built Heritage Subcommittee Report 14, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 12, and the report from the City Clerk entitled Status Update Council Inquiries in Motion for the period ending August 21, 2020, and summary of oral and written public submission for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of July 15, 2020 be received and adopted as amended.
On the motion, carried.
Carried.
Adopté, merci.
Carried.
Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. Councillor Suds, please, introducing her motion, seconded by Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the motion that is before us today is really, in my view, an opportunity for us as a council to make the best of a bad situation. A situation where the actions of our colleague has presented us now with an opportunity to do some good out of this. And I think how we choose to deal with this as a council, as leaders in our city, reveals a lot about us as well. We've taken the steps required. We've sought out the expertise of the commissioner to ensure that brave women who came forward were heard and were respected, and they trusted the process. The process that has brought us to this point, where we have an opportunity, as I said, to do some good and to bring something positive out of this situation. So by allocating our colleague's salary that's being withheld, which amounts to about $78,000, to community organizations that support survivors of domestic violence and or sexual assault, we have the opportunity to honor the brave women who have come forward and also to help others in our city who find themselves in similar situations. And we know in these difficult times with COVID that many are isolated and at home and not necessarily in great situations. So typically when we bring motions forward that have financial implications, we're challenged to identify a funding source, but today we have the opposite. We have an unexpected funding source, which also means an unexpected opportunity for some good to come out of this situation. So, Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read the motion?
I think it's your call, Councillor, or if you want to just read the therefore be it resolved, it's entirely up to you.
I will. We did go through it at the last council meeting. So I'll read the therefore be it resolved that the city's financial officer be directed to invest the total 2020 remuneration being suspended from this member of council due to the contraventions of Section 4 and 7 of the Code of Conduct to be allocated to community organizations that support survivors of domestic violence and or sexual assault in consultation with the General Manager of Community and Social Services.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, and I thank my colleagues for bringing this forward. It was an interesting idea to make use of funding that but I ask that we remind ourselves that this is important funding, but to keep our priorities in terms of helping those in need, where this is directed right now because...
Sorry, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor. Sorry, can you turn your camera off because it's... Sorry, could you turn your camera off, Councillor, because you're being chopped, your voice is getting chopped up. And apparently if you turn your camera off, it might help. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
No, you're cutting off again.
Is that better? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I do have my camera off. So I'll just briefly give a thank you to my colleagues and emphasize the importance to that we continue to look at funding opportunities for victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I appreciate this one-off opportunity, but I hope that we'll look at this in the future as in terms of our budgets. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very sorry that we weren't able to catch all of that, Councillor. Maybe we can work with you and IT to see if there's an issue, because it seems to be just your voice that gets chopped up for some reason. So we'll have to get that fixed. Councillor Cloutier, please.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you very much, and I absolutely support this great motion by my colleague, Councillor Sudds, and thank you, Councillor Sudds, for bringing this forward. Just for greatest clarity, and if I might offer a friendly amendment, in the therefore be it resolved, it's written, be directed to invest the total 2020 remuneration. I think some of the suspension of pay goes from 2020 into 2021, and therefore, just for the greatest of clarity, I wonder if we could just add total 2020, 2021 remuneration being suspended from this member of council to avoid any misunderstandings. I offer that as a simple, friendly amendment if it's accepted.
Councillor Sudds?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for raising that, and absolutely accepted.
Great. Okay, so that clerk will note that in the minutes. So anyone else wish to speak? I see no one on the list. So on the motion by Councillor Sudds, seconded by Councillor Gower, carried. Thank you, Councillor, for bringing that forward. The McKinney-Menard motion, of which notice was previously given at the July 2020 council meeting, has been withdrawn. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure, motion exigeant la suspension des règles de procédure, Councillor El Shantiri and Councillor Gower with respect to flood control infrastructure on the Mississippi River on suspension, carried. Councillor El Shantiri, if you'd like to introduce the motion, please. Make sure your mic's on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I hope the clerk will, here Kelly's putting the motion on the screen. But Mr. Mayor, this is to deal with the flood happened in 2017 and 2019 in the Mississippi catchment area, and this motion basically to support all our colleagues, other municipalities within the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority's watershed. And the whereas, I think I'll explain it. I don't have to read for you, but basically what we were being asked is, therefore be it resolved that the mayor, on behalf of council, write a letter to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry, the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Park, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, supporting the letter from the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority and requesting that funding of the Water and Erosion Control Infrastructure, WECR, program be significantly increased, and that program will be adjusted to allow a reasonable construction period and carry over of funds between fiscal years. So, Mr. Mayor, this is a request came from our colleague and the Mississippi Valley Conservation Board. Most of the municipality in like I said, in the water catchment area of MVCA are in support of this motion. And I hope my colleague also will support this motion so you can write to those ministers involved, the two ministers involved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll just get the list back up on the screen for a moment. There we go. Councillor Kavanaugh on the Mississippi River issue? Okay.
Yes, in terms of the, I thank my colleague for bringing it forward, but I wanted to know about Rideau Valley Conservation Authority and if it's possible to extend it because they're also a conservation authority that is underfunded. And I realize that he's being specific in terms of the Mississippi, and I have a little piece of that in my ward, but I think all the conservation authorities are being hit pretty hard, and we rely on them. So could it be extended to include them, to recognize their work as well?
Yeah, the clerk is telling me the ask is of a general nature, so it's not specifically for Mississippi. So
Can we hear from Councillor Moffat and Eagle Valley?
Councillor Moffat.
Any additional information?
I don't have any direct issue. I'm not sure I accept the premise that the RVCA is underfunded our budgets twice as much as the MVCAs and the SNCs. So, I mean, our budget's about $4.2 million. The cuts from the province equated to less than 1% of its entire budget.
Obviously, we don't have the same concern. Okay.
I wouldn't think so.
All right, Councillor Cavanaugh, any other follow-up?
Just want to make sure they're all on a level playing field.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So on the motion, carried. Adopté. Any other motions requiring suspension of the rules? I have none that have been presented. Notice the motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. I'm moving, seconded by Councillor McKenney, the denunciation of conversion therapy motion. Whereas on March 9th, 2020, the Government of Canada introduced Bill C-8, an act to amend the Criminal Code, conversion therapy. And whereas conversion therapy is defined by Bill C-8 as a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual or gender identity to cisgender, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior, for greater certainty, this definition does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to a person's gender transition or to a person's exploration of their identity or to its development. And it goes on to talk about the bill in particular, and then I'll just go to the be it therefore resolved. We'll have more opportunity to talk about it when it's debated at the next council meeting. Be it resolved that council formally denounce the practice of conversion therapy as harmful for individuals and to society by promoting myths and stereotypes about sexual orientation and gender identity. And be it further resolved that the Mayor be directed to send a letter to the Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth to express support for the reintroduction of Bill C-8, an act to amend the Criminal Code, conversion therapy, as soon as possible in the upcoming session of Parliament, and to encourage the Government of Canada to pass and implement this legislation in a quick manner. And therefore be it resolved that City Council hereby encourages anyone who may have experienced this harmful practice to reach out to help to various supports in the community, such as the Community's Information Centre of Ottawa, 211, community health centres across the city, Family Services Ottawa, around the Rainbow, the Royal Mental Health Centre, the Distress Centre of Ottawa's Mental Health Crisis Line, and the Youth Service Bureau's Ottawa Integrated Crisis Service, amongst others. And be it further resolved that City Council hereby encourages anyone who suspects that any criminal activity associated with conversion therapy, such as kidnapping and forcible confinement, has taken place, to report the activity to the Ottawa Police. So I thank my colleague, Councillor McKenney, for her always valuable input on these motions, and we'll have a more fulsome debate at our next council meeting. Are there any other notices of motion for consideration at our next meeting? No. Motion to introduce bylaws. Motion portant présentation de règlement. Councillor El-Shantiri, please, and seconded by Councillor Aglai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws pre-reading be read and passed.
On the motion, carried?
Carried.
Carried.
That the following bylaws be read and passed to confirm the proceeding of the council meeting of August 26, 2020.
On the confirmation bylaw, carried? Adopté?
Carried.
We have one written inquiry. Councillor Tierney, if you'd like to introduce your inquiry, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the clerk's office for making the language work. It's just a quick follow-up to our conversation today to ensure the water is not muddied. Can the medical officer of health request to review the level of granularity of information, i.e. zones and sources of transmission and best practices in the province of Ontario municipalities, and report back to Council as a part of a future COVID-19 update? Examples to contrast and compare: Hamilton, Mississauga, Toronto, on what levels of detail these municipalities use. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, can I get some clarity from the clerk's office whether or not the medical officer of health can accept a direction from council and not through the Board of Health, please?
Mr. O'Connor, could you comment on that, please?
I can, Mr. Mayor. We worked with the ward councillor to craft this particular inquiry as it is being a request. It's not a direction. And also as a result of the fact the medical officer of health has, for the last several months, consistently appeared at council meetings under the headline of verbal updates with regards to COVID-19. We thought this would be most appropriate under all the circumstances, being very clear that we were not directing the MOH to do anything, because I did indicate earlier that that would have to come from the Board of Health.
Thank you. I was just looking for that clarification because there's a different line of reporting or governance for public health. So thanks for the clarification, Mr. Clerk.
Great. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor El-Shantiri, adjournment, please. Need your mic. Eli?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. That the proceeding of the City Council meeting of August 26, 2020 be adjourned.
The motion carried, and to members of the public and the press, media availability will be available to start at 2 p.m. in about 12 minutes' time. Thank you. Merci. Meeting adjourned.